Welcome to Tarot Tuesday. My name is Shannon Douglas, and today we're going to talk about the number 12 card of the Major Arcana, the Hanged Man. We've been working through, over the last couple of months, we've worked up through the first cycle of tarot, the Fool card, up through the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune. And those are really very much internal aspects or internal archetypes of the individual in their development. And as we move into the higher, the second cycle of tarot, from the Justice card through the World card, we get into some more phenomenological concepts, let's say, things and archetypes that we experience in terms of relationships in the world and experiences that we have. Very often the number 11 card Justice is associated with karma, for example. It has to do with cause and effect. There are internal components to it as well, as there are with everything, of course. But in the 11 card, the number 12 card, which we're going to talk about today, the Hanged Man, there are definitely manifestations and expressions in the external world. So what's the Hanged Man represent? We can see him here strung up from a tree. He's got one hand tied behind his back, a leg tied in a figure 4, but he's got a halo around his head. So what does this represent? How does it express itself in the positive orientation of the card if you're doing readings, and when it falls in a spread for you, or when you're contemplating it? What does it mean when it's in the upside down or the inverted position? So if you've been following me for a while, occasionally I've talked about something called family systems theory. It's a theory in psychology that has to do with the different roles that we play in family dynamics. And these are particularly highlighted in families where there is dysfunction, addiction, or abusive personalities. And the breakdown in the family like that is you've got your abuser, your personality disordered individual, your bully, alcoholic, and then you've got an enabling individual or individuals in the space. And as a parent, that person who is abusive tends to play favorites and play games with other people in the household and put them into roles and categories, not treat them as individual human beings, but treat them as a projection of their own fragmented psyche. The roles we very often hear about fall into a couple of categories in this family system theory, besides the enabler and the abuser themselves. There's a golden child, there's often a lost child, and then there's a scapegoat and a whistleblower. Now, sometimes these are played by the same person. So, for example, if you've got two kids in a household, one's going to be the golden child, one's going to be the scapegoat, and sometimes the whistleblower in that role. So I grew up in a household like that. I was the scapegoat whistleblower. I have 2 siblings. I used to say, my brother caused the shit, I got the shit, and my sister's shit didn't stink. And there is a role in there when we see injustice and when we experience injustice. And we can experience injustice in all kinds of contexts in our lives. And the person who goes along to get along and just sort of lets injustice or poor behavior occur can be a bystander. In a workplace bullying situation, the roles of different people in the environment are an order of magnitude above the family systems theory, but they follow the same patterns. You've got the bully, you've got the target, you have the conscripted proxies that the bully recruits in order to attack the target. And you've got bystanders who know what's going on, but they don't do anything about it. And then you've got other, like perhaps ignorant people in the environment. Sometimes the target will be a whistleblower. Sometimes somebody else in the environment will be a whistleblower to point out the injustice and say that this is inappropriate and the way that this person is treating this person is unjust. But very often what happens, and the reason why there's so many bystanders who just keep their mouth shut, is that they know that if they blow the whistle or if they address the negative behavior, that the attention of the bully or the narcissist or the tyrant will turn on them, and they become another target, or they replace the original target. Now, we see this kind of behavior at scale and at very, very large scale. So the personality of the individual who occupies the White House right now, we could say it in plain language, in very simple terms, he's a bully. And we teach our kids in school that bullying is wrong, and that intimidating other people, that name calling is wrong, and that we shouldn't act this way, and that we want to raise people to behave in healthy circumstance. But what does Donald Trump do? He bullies people, and he attempts to intimidate people who disagree with him or criticize him or who speak the truth in his presence, and they become targets of his wrath and ire. And he picks individual people. Years and years ago, it was Rosie O'Donnell who called Trump out on some of his behavior, and Trump engaged and escalates and doubled down. And this is the typical behavior of a bully or a malignant personality disordered individual in a family context, family systems theory. Typical behavior of that when we get an experience, if we've ever had that, of bullying in the workplace, and it operates at scale. And it can also involve groups of people. So when these patterns of energy operate at scale, what happens is that instead of we have an individual perpetrator and an individual target, the individual in power targets a group of people. And labels them and attacks them and puts them down. And so the famous descent on the escalator, it was Mexicans were rapists and criminals and bringing crime and drugs and all these things into the country. That scale of racism targets a group of people, aligns proxies who maybe are thinking along the same lines, and then can feel emboldened by it to attack the target group. And then you've got groups of whistleblowers. So what was the first thing that Donald Trump did when he got into office? Was he enacted the Muslim ban, and to stop people of a specific religion from coming into the United States or emigrating to the United States. And he worked the legal system in order to get himself to a place where he could enact a ban from problem countries that wasn't called a Muslim ban anymore, which was outright religious bigotry and racism. And then he massaged it to justify the kind of targeting behavior that was destructive to a group of people. You get the scripting now, or the narrative now, of radical Democrats that are trying to turn over, destroy the world and destroy the economy and destroy your lives, and everything that this bully can target onto a group of people, say it over and over again, engage proxies. And then there are lots of people who are whistleblowers in the environment that we live in. There are people who are watching what's going on, recognizing that these things are wrong, and doing whatever they can to speak up for it. Now, really, I think the only thing that we can possibly do at this point, and I'm a Canadian, is I can hope that lots and lots and lots, like an unprecedented number of Americans, turn out to vote. And that the democratic institutions that still exist in the United States, because they've been corroded away, can withstand the further degradation, or whatever degradation that Trump can manage between now and Election Day. So why am I talking about this in terms of the hanged man? Well, the hanged man is the whistleblower. It is the individual who's looking at a system, or looking at an environment, whether it's being within a family, being within a business context, or being within a governmental social context, and saying what's going on here is wrong. It's wrong. And standing in principle regardless of the consequence. And another word for this whistleblower is martyr. And religious martyrs, it's a really packed word, right? So we know that in extremist ideologies and religious traditions, and the expressions of extremism within some of those traditions, unfortunately, and there are extremists in Christian right wing as well, much more problematic in the United States than any Muslim extremism. But there are people that willingly in the Middle East, and have for years, we've known about this, will martyr themselves, quote unquote, for the cause by blowing themselves up. This is not a good manifestation of righteousness, and it's an indefensible process. But the label, if you're going to die for your cause, you become a martyr for that cause. Well, when the cause is justice, which is the card we talked about last week, rightness, trueness, integrity, and understanding the balance of karma, then a person can stand in their own truth under, I talked about the Egyptian goddess Mayet, which is the goddess of truth and straightness and rightness. When we can embrace and understand that truth and righteousness, and we're willing to make a sacrifice for it by taking a stand, knowing that there are consequences. So when I would confront, or when I would be confronted with bullying and psychological and physical abuse in the household that I grew up in, and I stood up to it, I talked back, it made it worse. But it also satisfied me in a certain respect, because I could say that the things that you're doing to me aren't justified, and you're the problem here. And when I moved out of the house that I grew up in, it was after a confrontation with my father. At that point, I was significantly larger than him, and a fistful of shirt and chest hair and a cocked fist, ready for the that archetypal transformation or transition of the abused individual into adulthood, is to say, you can't hurt me anymore. Looking at his face and saying to him, you're a little man, and taking that stand and owning it and leaving. And I was only a teenager when that happened, it was a moment of transition in my life. But the bullying dynamic is something that I encountered throughout my whole life, because I was kind of raised and conditioned for this. And I've always been the shit disturber that points out the hypocrisies in the environment, the corruption in business environments, and that I've had the misfortune to work in. Fortunately, not for a very long time. And to confront the kind of shitty behavior that some people behave in or exhibit in their own self-interest and at the expense of others, and sometimes with the deliberate and conscious understanding that behavior is hurting people. So I've always been that whistleblower, and I've understood the hanged man at quite a deep level, because I know the consequences of standing up to that kind of attack, that kind of injustice. And it takes a certain kind of person to be willing to do that. Many people will just say, not my business, or, I'm going to skate by this and I'm just going to, let this exist where it is, or they're going to look the other way, see no evil, hear no evil, etc., etc. But some people will have the courage to stand up. And those are the people in the Second World War in Europe that formed the resistance and the underground movement. Those are the people who smuggled Jewish people out of Germany to avoid them going off to concentration camps. Those are the people who assisted in the Underground Railroad, spiriting African Americans out of slavery from the south to the north. Those are the people who take a stand for truth and for values, and sometimes they do get hung up. And the most sort of the forefront icon of that being strung up from a tree for principles in our Western grammar, our symbolic grammar, is Jesus Christ. And I'm not a practicing Christian. I know the stories very, very well, and I know the teachings very, very well. Christ took a stand because he had run afoul of the Pharisees, who were in many cases corrupt, and they're money changers and conducting commerce in the temples and being caught up in bureaucracy and legalism, and had diverged a great deal from the truth of God and the connection to God, as well as being caught between the Roman authorities and being persecuted for sedition. So he was crucified, and that's the image that we get in the hanged man card, as you can see here. It was traditional during certain periods of the Inquisition to hang a heretic upside down, tied the way that the hanged man is tied. And you can see with the halo around his head that this is a righteous sacrifice that the individual is making. If you're a whistleblower, you always know that there is going to be consequences to your actions. Now, maybe the most interesting figure to me in the modern context, when talking about whistleblowing, when talking about being a martyr and standing up for justice and what's right and what's legal and what's proper, is the now retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Vindman testified at the congressional impeachment hearings in the fall of 2019. He was the intelligence officer who was able to corroborate the aspects of the telephone call between Donald Trump and the president of Ukraine, who he was trying to strong arm and manipulate into digging up dirt or fabricating dirt on Trump's most feared competitor in the 2020 elections, Joe Biden. And we learned from Vindman and numerous other officials who came forward at risk to their own careers and at risk to their own safety, because many of these people received and still receive death threats. They have had to go into hiding, and they've had to protect themselves from people who are radical enough and charged up enough and empowered enough as proxies of Donald Trump to go and commit violence in the name of Trump. So Vindman took that stand, and he spoke very eloquently. I won't quote him very well in saying it, but he said, "I'm not afraid. My parents came here from Russia. In Russia, you're not allowed to speak freely. If you do, there are severe consequences. I know that we came to America because we can speak freely here and we can tell the truth. And in telling the truth, I'm not going to be imprisoned or killed because of that behavior." Now, as you may know, Alexander Vindman had to retire from the military. It became abundantly clear that he was being passed over for promotions that he was entitled to and eligible for, and he should have had. But because he took the stand against the president, and that particular bully is vindictive and manipulative, and who exercises all kinds of destructive power that compromises institutions, Alexander Vindman is no longer in the American intelligence services and has retired from the military. So that's some of the story behind the Hanged Man. Now, obviously, the inversion of the Hanged Man, he appears right side up, not hanging from a tree at all, but almost levitating in glory. And there's a number of different ways I think we could look at this, but I think it stresses the importance, if we do find ourselves in a situation where it's important to take a stand, where we weigh the consequences and the impact of being a whistleblower, good and bad, to pick the horses that you're going to bet on. One of the best pieces of advice I ever had about parenting, and my kids are grown and gone now, was when my kids were very young. My son was 4, my daughter was just born. A really great friend of mine, I've called him the Hermit in the Hills and talked about him a little bit in previous videos, but he said to me, it's really important when you're raising kids, let your yes be your yes and your no be your no, and you need to know when to pick your battles. If you pick a battle, you fight it to win, and you need to know that you've picked a righteous battle. But if somebody asks you for something and you say no, let that be no. And if somebody asks you for something and you say yes, let that be yes. Own it. And this is really important with an approach to righteousness, to justice, and to taking a stand in that kind of thing, is to recognize that you need to pick your battles. You need to, if you make the move to be the whistleblower, you need to recognize that there are consequences that come along with it. And there are people out of ego and out of distortion who will look at martyrdom a lot like suicide bombers in the Middle East will look at martyrdom, and martyr themselves for an unjust cause or for unjust reasons, or take an approach to whistleblowing and being the hanged man that has consequences that are more devastating than the things that they're trying to fix. So that's Tarot Tuesday for today. Today's the first day of fall. As a matter of fact, it's the fall equinox. I've done another video that I launched today having to do with astrology and the equinox, and I've tied in a bunch of solar cycles and stuff. So if you're keen on those kinds of themes in spirituality and your study of symbolism, astrology is one of the 4 pillars of tarot: astrology, Kabbalah, alchemy, and numerology. And I've actually done about a 2-hour video talking about the archetypes and the symbols of astrology and the energies of the various archetypes and planets. in the astrological set. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver, forthcoming book on the nature of the Logos and our quest to understand our own spiritual natures.